Teniola was the epitome of grace and generosity in Lagos. As a successful entrepreneur, she had built a reputation for her kindness, often contributing to charity and helping the less fortunate. Her business empire, spanning from tech to fashion, was a symbol of modern African entrepreneurship. At the center of her life was her best friend, Sade, whom she had known since childhood. Their bond had weathered the test of time, and Teniola trusted Sade implicitly, confiding in her about everything. She often joked about how Sade was the sister she never had. However, unknown to Teniola, Sade's life was beginning to spiral out of control. Her mother, once a vibrant woman, had fallen ill with a rare disease, and the medical bills were piling up. Sade had spent her savings, borrowed from friends, and even sold some personal belongings, but the costs were far beyond her reach. Desperation took hold of her heart, clouding her judgment. She knew that Teniola, with her wealth and good heart, would never turn her down. But what she didn't anticipate was the dangerous game she was about to play. Sade devised a plan to kidnap Teniola, hoping to ransom her for the money needed to save her mother. She convinced herself it was the only way out, that it was for a good cause. Teniola had always been there for her, so surely, she would understand once the ordeal was over. Little did she know, the choice she was making would change everything. It was an ordinary evening when the unthinkable happened. Teniola had just wrapped up a meeting at her Lagos office and was on her way home. As she stepped out of her car in the garage of her luxury apartment complex, she was abruptly surrounded by masked men. The world around her blurred as a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her into a black van. Her heart raced as she tried to scream, but the hand over her mouth was too strong. The van door slammed shut, and in an instant, Teniola was whisked away into the night. As the van sped through the busy streets of Lagos, Teniola struggled against the restraints, her mind racing for answers. It didn't take long for the truth to hit her: this wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated this, and she had a sinking feeling about who might be involved. Her best friend, Sade, had been acting strange recently. Was this her doing? Back at her apartment, Sade paced back and forth, her hands trembling. She had never imagined it would come to this, but there was no turning back now. She had orchestrated the perfect crime, or so she thought. Her phone buzzed, and a message from the gang leader popped up on the screen. The ransom demands are clear. Deliver the money by noon tomorrow, or she dies. Sade's stomach churned, the weight of what she had done settling heavily on her conscience. This was no longer just about her mother's medical bills. It was about something much darker, and she was now in too deep to escape. Sade's hands were slick with sweat as she held the phone, her mind racing. She had never been part of anything like this before. The gang leader's words echoed in her mind, and the reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She had kidnapped her best friend, someone she had loved like family, and now her life was in the hands of ruthless criminals. The message from the gang leader was simple: pay the ransom or we kill her. Teniola's life hung in the balance, and Sade knew she had no choice but to comply. But as the hours passed, she felt a gnawing fear in her gut. What would happen after the money was delivered? Would they let her go? And what about her mother? The money she had hoped to use for her medical bills was slipping further out of reach. Was it all worth it? At that moment, Sade realized she was no longer in control of the situation. The plan she had carefully crafted was slipping through her fingers. The gang's demands were non-negotiable, and her involvement in the kidnapping had put her in a precarious position. She could only pray that the money would be enough to satisfy the gang's thirst for blood and that Teniola would survive. But deep down, she feared the worst. The tension was palpable in the hideout where Teniola was being held. She had been bound to a chair, the cold concrete floor beneath her sending shivers through her spine. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the events that led to this point. She had been friends with Sade for years, trusted her with her life. But now, Her best friend's betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain she had ever known. Teniola had always believed that Sade would never hurt her, that their bond was unbreakable. But the truth was impossible to ignore now. Sade had kidnapped her for money that Teniola had in abundance, but not in the way Sade had imagined. As the hours dragged on, Teniola's heart sank with each passing minute. Her phone, left on the table beside her, buzzed occasionally with calls and messages she could not answer. Then, the sound of a door creaking open shattered the silence. The gang leader stepped into the room, a sinister grin on his face. "We're waiting for your friend to pay up," he said, his voice cold and detached. "If she doesn't, things will get much worse for you." Teniola's heart skipped a beat as she realized the full extent of the situation. It wasn't just a ransom anymore, it was a game of life and death, and Sade was playing with fire. She had underestimated the cruelty of the people she had gotten involved with. The worst part was that Teniola could not see a way out, not without a miracle. Sade was sitting in a dimly lit room, her thoughts clouded by the consequences of her actions. She had once viewed this as a temporary solution, a means to an end. But now, as she stared at the money she had painstakingly gathered, she realized how much she had lost in the process. The image of Teniola's face, terrified and confused, haunted her every thought. When the gang leader had first approached her, they had promised her that everything would go smoothly. But nothing had gone as planned. Teniola's captivity was taking a toll on her, and the pressure to deliver the ransom was unbearable. Sade couldn't shake the feeling that she was being manipulated, that she had been a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous scheme. The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her from her dark thoughts. She answered without hesitation. "Is everything ready?" the gang leader's voice demanded. Sade's heart pounded in her chest. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "I've got the money. I'll bring it to the location." As the call ended, Sade's hands shook. She knew that if she delivered the ransom, she would be free, at least for a while. But the guilt gnawed at her. How could she face Teniola after all this? Could she ever redeem herself? And if the gang didn't let Teniola go after the money was paid, what would she do then? The weight of her betrayal was crushing, and Sade knew there was no turning back. She had made a deal with the devil, and now she had to face the consequences. The hours seemed to stretch into eternity as Sade prepared for the handover. Every corner of her apartment felt like a prison as she paced back and forth, her mind constantly replaying the events that had led to this point. Her phone lay on the table, but it felt like a ticking time bomb. With every minute that passed, the pressure grew. Teniola's life hung in the balance, and all Sade could do was try to appease the gang that had so ruthlessly manipulated her. Sade knew she had crossed the line. She had betrayed the only person who had ever truly cared for her. The guilt was unbearable, but it was overshadowed by the overwhelming fear that if she didn't comply, everything would spiral out of control. She had been forced into this by the very people she had once trusted. They promised her mother's life in exchange for Teniola's. As the appointed time drew near, Sade grabbed the bag filled with cash, her hands trembling. She made her way to the location given by the gang. It was a secluded building, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Lagos. As she approached, the darkness seemed to swallow her whole, and a shiver ran down her spine. The man waiting at the door nodded without a word and led her inside. Sade handed over the money, praying that it would be enough to end this nightmare. But the gang leader, with his cold eyes, only smirked. "This is just the beginning. You've made a deal with us now. Don't think for a second that you can walk away." Sade's heart sank. There was no turning back. The money had been handed over, but the feeling of relief that Sade expected never came. Instead, the gang leader walked away with the cash without saying another word. Sade waited in agonizing silence, her heart racing as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She had delivered the ransom, but something felt wrong. The silence was too thick, and the weight of it settled on her like a heavy shroud. A cold gust of wind blew through the warehouse, and just as Sade began to question whether everything would go as promised, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning quickly, her stomach churned at the sight of Teniola, bound and bruised, being pushed toward her by two of the gang members. But instead of the usual pleading, Teniola looked at her with cold, hard eyes, filled with disbelief and anger. "Teniola," Sade whispered, her voice faltering. But Teniola did not answer. She looked past Sade, her eyes filled with hatred and hurt. The betrayal was too deep to express in words. She had been through hours of hell, not knowing if she would survive, and now, standing before her best friend, she could see the weight of the truth in her eyes. This was no longer just about money, it was about something far more sinister. The gang leader stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "It's too late for apologies now, isn't it? You've done what we asked, but you've become part of our game, and games have winners and losers. So far, you're losing." Sade's world crashed down around her as Teniola was roughly shoved into the back of a van. Her best friend, her family, was being taken away once more, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The feeling of helplessness was crushing. Sade's heart raced as she watched the van speed away, carrying Teniola further into the darkness. She had done the unthinkable. She had betrayed her best friend, and now she was paying the price. The gang was no longer interested in just the money, they wanted to make an example of both Sade and Teniola. And Sade knew that she was just as much a target as Teniola. With the weight of her choices pressing down on her, Sade felt a surge of determination. She had to do something. She could not allow Teniola to suffer because of her mistakes. She could not bear the thought of losing her best friend forever. But the question was, how could she fight back against a ruthless gang when she had already signed her own fate? Desperation led Sade to make a dangerous decision. She would go to the police, but she knew that the gang had eyes everywhere. The authorities in Lagos were often compromised by the influence of powerful criminals, and Sade was not naive enough to believe they would act swiftly to protect her or Teniola. She had to take matters into her own hands. Sade reached out to an old contact, a private investigator named David, who had once worked with her family. He had disappeared from her life years ago, but Sade had no other options. She needed help, and she needed it fast. As she waited for David's reply, a small flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Perhaps she could still make things right. David had changed. The man who had once been a friend of her family now seemed distant, almost detached. But he was still the best at what he did. After the initial awkwardness of their reunion, Sade explained the situation, leaving out none of the details. Every word felt like it was cutting her deeper, but there was no time to dwell on guilt. Her only focus now was saving Teniola. David listened intently, his face unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "I'll help you. But this won't be easy. These gangs have connections that run deep. We'll need a plan, and it can't be rushed." Sade nodded, swallowing hard. She had no illusions about the danger they were about to face. But she was committed now, and the only way out was through. David's first piece of advice was to find out more about the gang's operations. They were ruthless, but they were not invincible. If Sade could get to the heart of their organization, perhaps they could be brought down. But that would mean getting closer to the gang, and it was a dangerous path to walk. Meanwhile, Teniola was being held in a hidden compound on the outskirts of Lagos, surrounded by armed guards. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. But the one thing that kept her going was the thought of justice. She knew that Sade was out there, and that there was still a chance to escape. Teniola had never felt so alone. The cold, damp walls of the compound seemed to close in around her, and the constant sound of footsteps and voices outside only amplified her sense of isolation. She had no idea where she was or who to trust. But one thing was clear, the gang had no intention of letting her go. As the hours turned into days, Teniola's will to survive grew stronger. She could not allow herself to fall into despair. She would find a way out, no matter the cost. And somehow, she knew that Sade was out there, somewhere, trying to fix what had gone so terribly wrong. But even as her determination grew, she could feel the walls closing in. The gang had grown bolder, and their demands had become more ruthless. They had promised her a quick death if their ransom demands weren't met, and Teniola had no illusions about the severity of their threats. Her thoughts often turned to Sade, the woman she had once considered a sister. How could she have been so blind? How had she not seen the signs of betrayal? But the past was gone now. All that mattered was the present, the fight for survival. David's investigation into the gang's operations had begun to yield results. With the help of his network of contacts, he uncovered key details about the gang's hierarchy and the leader's true identity. The gang leader, a man named Obinna, was far more dangerous than Sade had ever imagined. He was ruthless and cunning, with a network of loyal followers who would do anything to protect him. But David had also uncovered something crucial: Obinna's weakness. The gang leader had a brother, a man named Uche, who had been estranged from him for years. Uche was living in hiding, and David believed he could be persuaded to help them take down the gang. Sade's heart raced as she listened to David's plan. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. With this new information, David and Sade prepared for the next phase of their mission. They would need to track down Uche and convince him to join their cause. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. As they set their plan into motion, Sade couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every second that passed was one more second that Teniola was at the mercy of the gang. She had to act quickly before it was too late. Teniola had been through so much, yet she remained determined to survive despite the heavy chains of despair. Meanwhile, Sade, David, and Uche moved in the dead of night, navigating through dark alleys and silent streets. They approached the compound where Teniola was held, a secret fortress that lay on the fringes of Lagos. The air was thick with tension, every step echoing the risks they were about to face. Armed with a daring plan and a newfound alliance, they infiltrated the compound under the cover of darkness. Every sound was amplified: the shuffle of boots on concrete, whispered commands, and the ever-present hum of imminent danger. Their hearts pounded in unison, synchronizing with the rhythm of the night spiral. But their entry didn't go unnoticed. The gang had anticipated their move. Someone inside had tipped them off, and now Sade and her team found themselves surrounded by armed men. The realization struck like lightning: the gang was always one step ahead. Trapped in the moonlit shadows, Sade's heart raced as heavy footsteps closed in from all directions. Panic surged, but she suppressed it. There was no time for fear. They had to fight or be captured, and neither option was appealing. With a whispered command, she urged Uche and David to stay low, and together they made a desperate dash for a narrow escape. Gunshots erupted around them, a chaotic symphony of defiance and survival. A stray bullet narrowly missed Sade as she dove for cover behind a stack of crates. The struggle for survival intensified. David, ever composed, returned fire with calculated precision while Uche, though visibly trembling, joined the fray. With a steely resolve, Sade signaled for a break. She sprinted towards a weak spot in the fence, using every ounce of strength as pain surged through her body when a bullet grazed her side. Crawling through the gap, she fought against the thorns and jagged metal that tore at her skin, all in the name of survival. Once out of the compound, the team didn't have a moment to rest. They bolted through the maze of alleyways until the sounds of gunfire faded into the distance. But the escape was only temporary. They needed to regroup, tend to wounds, and plan their next move before the gang's relentless pursuit caught up with them. At a safe house on the outskirts of Lagos, Sade collapsed onto a worn-out couch, her breath ragged and shallow. David immediately tended to her deepening wound, knowing that any delay could be fatal. Amid the sterile chaos of makeshift bandages and whispered reassurances, the team began to formulate a plan for their next strike against the oppressive gang. By morning, though Sade's wound was still painful, a sense of urgency pushed them forward. They huddled around a small table, poring over maps and intelligence reports that detailed the gang's hideouts. The plan was simple yet dangerous: one decisive strike on the compound where Teniola was held captive, a rescue mission against all odds. Every second that ticked by was a step closer to either salvation or disaster. The day was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain and imminent danger. As they neared the compound, the tension was almost unbearable. The gang's presence was palpable, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. With synchronized precision, the trio breached the compound's outer defenses, their hearts pounding as they advanced. Their entry, however, triggered alarms that shattered the silence, plunging the dark corridors into chaos. Amid the cacophony of panic and gunfire, they had no choice but to press forward. The stakes were higher than ever, Teniola's life hung in the balance, and every moment could be their last. Within moments of bursting through the door to Teniola's cell, they were met with a torrent of violence. Teniola, though bruised and battered, rose with a determined glint in her eyes as she recognized Sade. Words of regret and apologies were lost in the roar of the ensuing battle. With every step, the struggle to escape grew more desperate, but with David and Uche covering their retreat, they managed to break free from the compound. Their escape was a grueling marathon through darkened streets, every step marked by the looming threat of capture. But despite the relentless pursuit and the scars of betrayal, a fragile hope began to take root. Though the battle for survival had taken a tremendous toll, Sade found solace in the unity of their ragtag team. Each shared glance, every silent nod of determination, was a promise that they would not let this nightmare define their future. In the aftermath of the harrowing escape, the city of Lagos began to show signs of resilience. Sade and her team regrouped at a hidden safe house, where plans for dismantling the gang's operations were set into motion. David's investigations uncovered the labyrinthine network that connected Obinna, the enigmatic gang leader, to corrupt officials and international crime syndicates. A key piece of intelligence emerged: Obinna's reign was bolstered by his estranged brother, Uche, whose conflicted loyalty could be turned into an advantage. A small town on the outskirts of Lagos became the meeting ground where Uche, reeling from his own tormented past, was persuaded to join the cause against his brother. Amid hesitant confessions and shared losses, a fragile alliance was forged, one that could tip the scales in their favor. Together, they crafted a daring rescue plan, setting the stage for a direct confrontation with the dark underbelly of Lagos. But as they inched closer to dismantling the Empire of Terror, betrayal reared its ugly head. A trusted informant, Chidi, revealed his double allegiance under crushing pressure from Obinna. His confession of forced treachery left the team reeling, but despite the bitter taste of betrayal, they made the painful decision to let him go, knowing that his presence would only endanger them further. For a brief interlude, a semblance of calm reigned over their safe house. In these moments of fleeting respite, Sade and Teniola wrestled with their shattered trust and the unspoken question of whether forgiveness was ever possible. Yet, in the midst of the turmoil, hope persisted, the hope that someday, the battered city of Lagos would rise from its ashes. Then came the attack that shattered the fragile calm. Armed men stormed the safe house without warning, their violent intrusion a brutal reminder that their enemies were never far behind. In the ensuing melee, Teniola was violently dragged away, and Sade was forced to fight for every precious second. The chaos was indescribable: gunshots, shouts, and the deafening thud of hearts racing toward uncertain fates. In a desperate moment, Sade found the courage to grab a nearby firearm and fire, buying them a sliver of time as she fought to reclaim the night. Despite the narrow escape from that fateful attack, the warning was clear: the enemy was relentless. As the nights grew darker and danger more palpable, the team realized that their struggle was far from over. Every decision, every risk, was a step on a treacherous path leading them deeper into the labyrinth of crime and corruption that had long held Lagos captive. The battle evolved into an intricate dance of daring raids and covert operations. Each mission brought them closer to the heart of Obina's empire, and with every revelation, the stakes grew higher. Through whispered alliances and covert operations, the team targeted shipments, intercepted clandestine meetings, and gathered damning evidence, all to bring down the man who had terrorized the city for so long. The tipping point arrived at a grand gala, a luxurious event hosted by Obina himself, attended by the city's most influential figures. Under the guise of elegance and celebration, the team had orchestrated their boldest move yet. With hearts stilled by the trials of their past, Sade and her allies infiltrated the gala, their true mission masked behind false identities and determined smiles. As the night unfolded, the carefully laid trap sprang into action. In a dramatic turn of events, encrypted files revealed Obina's darkest secrets to every eye in the ballroom. The opulent facade crumbled under the weight of indisputable evidence, and chaos erupted as the truth splintered the ties that bound power and corruption. In that electrifying moment, David seized control of the narrative, disarming Obina's defenses and ensuring that the public would witness the full extent of his treachery. In the whirlwind that followed, Obina's empire unraveled. His loyal henchmen scattered like leaves in a storm, and within minutes, the police arrived to reclaim a city that had long been enslaved by fear. As the authorities led a defeated Obina away in handcuffs, Sade and her team stood silently, their victory marred by the heavy toll it had extracted. The city began to heal, albeit slowly. Amid the rubble of shattered dreams and broken lives, hope stirred. Communities once oppressed by terror now dared to envision a future free from the specter of violence. In the wake of Obina's downfall, Sade, Teniola, and David found themselves at a crossroads, a moment to reconcile the price of their hard-won freedom with the promise of a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Sade and Teniola channeled their pain into purpose. They co-founded a non-profit organization dedicated to rebuilding the lives torn apart by Obina's reign. Their efforts spanned from reconstructing homes and community centers to providing education and job opportunities for the youth. It was a humble but heartfelt attempt to stitch together the frayed fabric of a city scarred by violence. Yet even as Lagos began to transform, the shadows of the past remained. Sade could not shake the lingering threat of retribution, a sense that the dark undercurrents of criminal power had not been completely vanquished. Late one night, while walking to her car, she sensed a presence watching her from the darkness. A hooded figure vanished as quickly as he appeared, a silent omen of dangers yet to come. The quiet threat soon escalated. Rumors began to circulate of a new power rising from the ruins of Obina's empire, a ruthless figure named Felix, once a trusted lieutenant, now determined to fill the void with an iron fist. His network, as expansive as it was dangerous, stretched into the corridors of government and crime alike. With every public display of arrogance, Felix drew closer to the heart of Lagos, and it became clear that Sade and her team would have to face this new enemy head-on. In a series of tense meetings and covert operations, Sade, David, and Teniola rallied their forces. They set out to uncover the inner workings of Felix's operation, piecing together intelligence from hesitant informants and risky infiltrations. The more they learned, the more it became apparent that Felix was not merely content with local control, he was forging dangerous alliances with international arms dealers, a revelation that transformed their struggle into a global conflict. Just when hope seemed to wane, an unexpected ally emerged from the shadows. Aya turned, the tenacious journalist who had once risked everything to expose Obina, reappeared with vital intelligence. His findings revealed not only Felix's nefarious plans but also hinted at a sinister collaboration with forces far more formidable than they had ever imagined. Armed with this explosive new information, the final confrontation was set in motion. In a high-rise building overlooking the pulsing cityscape of Lagos, Sade and Felix finally came face to face. Amid a backdrop of thunderous chaos and the piercing glow of city lights, they exchanged words laced with hatred and defiance. Felix, with fury in his eyes, mocked Sade's efforts, branding her nothing more than a puppet in a futile rebellion. Sade, resolute and unyielding, declared that the reins of power had now passed into the hands of the people. In the ensuing battle, every moment was a desperate struggle for survival. As Felix's empire crumbled around him, Sade and her team managed to subdue his forces and secure a victory that reverberated throughout the city. The arrest of Felix marked the final blow to the criminal underworld that had long held Lagos hostage. In the quiet aftermath, as police sirens faded into the distance, the true cost of their victory became painfully clear. The once indomitable team, Sade, Teniola, and David, stood together, forever altered by the trials they had endured. The city, though battered and bruised, began its slow journey towards healing. New hope blossomed amid the ruins as community centers opened their doors and the spirit of resilience surged through the streets. In the ensuing months, Sade and Teniola shifted from warriors to rebuilders. They poured their energy into the non-profit organization they had established, offering solace, support, and tangible opportunities to those whose lives had been shattered by years of oppression. Alongside them, David receded from the public eye, seeking the quiet redemption of a life away from constant conflict. Their shared mission was clear: to mend the fractured heart of Lagos and to create a future where fear was replaced by hope. Yet, even as the city embraced renewal, Sade remained vigilant. The specter of past enemies lingered, a constant reminder that the fight for justice was never truly over. She had learned that every victory demanded sacrifice, and that the journey towards healing was paved with both triumph and sorrow. Standing at the edge of the ocean, watching the sun set over a city on the mend, Sade allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. Though the scars of betrayal and loss would remain, so too would the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. Together, they stepped forward into an uncertain future, united by the bonds forged in adversity and driven by the belief that, despite the darkness, hope could still flourish.
There are a lot of lessons to be learned from this story. I would love to hear your opinion in comment section. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to like, share, and press the red button to subscribe to my channel. Bye.